The sound of screeching tires echoed through the quiet suburban streets of Boston as Arthur Donovan's black Mercedes-AMG skidded around the corner on this cold November night, FBI sirens wailing behind him like the screams of banshees. His knuckles were bone white against the leather steering wheel, blood trickling down his left temple from where a sniper's bullet had grazed him just 30 minutes ago. At 42, the notorious Mafia boss had survived countless wars in the underworld of New England, but tonight felt different. Tonight he was running for his life with nowhere left to hide. His phone buzzed incessantly with frantic calls from his lieutenants Vincent Torino, Marco Santelli, even his cousin Bobby from the Brooklyn operation, but Arthur ignored them all. The FBI had been planning this coordinated raid for months, maybe years, and someone on the inside had sold him out completely. His empire, built over 2 decades of blood, sweat, and calculated violence, was crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. He needed somewhere to disappear, and he needed it fast. Then, like a lightning bolt in the darkness, he remembered Rosa Martinez. For 3 long years, the quiet 38-year-old woman had cleaned his downtown office every Tuesday and Friday evening. She moved through his world like a ghost, invisible and efficient, emptying trash cans and dusting furniture while he conducted business that could send him to prison for life. Most importantly, she had absolutely no idea who he really was. To her, he was just another businessman in an expensive suit, Mr. Donovan from accounting, she probably thought. Hey there, beautiful souls. Before we dive deeper into Arthur's desperate escape through the mean streets of Boston, I need you to hit that subscribe button if you're loving this intense story so far, and tell me in the comments where in the world are you watching from tonight. I love hearing from my international family spread across the globe, and don't forget to smash that like button, because this story is about to get absolutely wild. We're talking danger, romance, and twists that will blow your mind. Arthur's Mercedes roared through Rosa's working-class neighborhood in East Boston, where his $100,000 luxury car stood out like a diamond in the dirt among the modest Toyota Camrys and beat-up pickup trucks. He parked hastily behind her modest blue Honda Civic and limped to the front door of her small 2-story house, his $2,000 designer suit torn and bloodied from crawling through drainage tunnels and scaling chain-link fences during his escape. When Rosa opened the door wearing her favorite pink pajamas with little hearts on them, her dark chocolate eyes widened in complete shock. Her thick black hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she looked so innocent, so pure, so far removed from his violent world. Before she could scream and alert the entire neighborhood, Arthur pressed his finger to his lips and whispered urgently, his voice hoarse with desperation, "Shut up. Don't say a word." "Mr. Donovan?" Rosa stammered, her heart beating so fast she thought it might burst. "What are you doing here? What happened to your face?" Arthur pushed past her into the small living room, which was decorated with family photos and religious candles, quickly closing the door and turning off all the lights. The house smelled like vanilla candles and her mother's cooking tamales and fresh tortillas scents that reminded him painfully of his own childhood before everything went wrong. "I need your help," he said, his usual commanding tone replaced with something she'd never heard before in all their brief interactions, raw, desperate fear. "The police are after me, and I need somewhere to hide, just for a few hours until my people can figure something out." Rosa backed against the wall, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. In the darkness, she could smell his expensive cologne, Tom Ford. She recognized it from the department store, where she sometimes window shopped, mixed with something metallic and frightening. "Blood. You're bleeding," she whispered, noticing the dark stain spreading across his white shirt. "Mr. Donovan, you're really hurt." "I'll be fine," Arthur lied through gritted teeth, though the room was starting to spin like a carnival ride, and he could taste copper pennies in his mouth. "Just, please. I know you don't understand any of this, but I'm asking you to trust me for just one night." Outside, police sirens grew louder and more numerous, like a pack of wolves closing in for the kill. Arthur's jaw tightened with the knowledge that they had less than 5 minutes before this entire neighborhood would be crawling with federal agents. Rosa looked at this powerful man who suddenly seemed so vulnerable and desperate, and something in his dark eyes, something that reminded her of a wounded animal, made her decision. "Upstairs," she whispered, grabbing his hand. "Quick, before they see the lights." Rosa led Arthur up the narrow wooden staircase to her bedroom, her mind racing with 1,000 questions that threatened to overwhelm her. What kind of trouble was he really in? Why had he come specifically to her house out of all the places in Boston? And why wasn't she calling 911 right now like any sensible person would? Her grandmother's rosary beads clicked softly on her nightstand as they passed, and she whispered a quick prayer under her breath. "In here," she whispered urgently, opening the door to her small walk-in closet. "Behind my dresses and winter coats, don't make a sound." Arthur squeezed his large 6'2" frame into the cramped space, which was barely big enough for one person, let alone a man of his size. He found himself surrounded by Rosa's simple work uniforms, navy blue polo shirts and black pants, along with a few colorful sundresses that smelled like her lavender fabric softener. The irony wasn't lost on him that the man who owned 3 mansions, 2 yachts and a private jet was now hiding in a cleaning lady's closet like a common criminal. "Stay absolutely quiet," Rosa ordered, her voice steadier than she actually felt inside. "Don't move, don't cough, don't even breathe too loud. I'm serious about this." Minutes later, the sound of heavy military-style boots echoed through her house like thunder, followed by the unmistakable sound of her front door being kicked open with tremendous force. Rosa's heart hammered against her ribs as she went downstairs in her robe, trying her best to look sleepy. Confused and slightly annoyed at being woken up at this ungodly hour. "Ma'am, FBI Special Task Force," Agent Sarah Collins announced with authority, flashing her badge and photograph identification. She was a stern-looking woman in her 40s, with short blonde hair and cold blue eyes that missed nothing. "We're looking for a dangerous fugitive who may have entered this neighborhood within the last hour. Arthur Donovan. Have you ever seen this man?" Rosa stared at the color photograph, and her blood ran completely cold in her veins. The handsome, strong-jawed face in the picture was definitely the same man currently hiding in her bedroom closet, but this wasn't the polite businessman she knew from the office building. The FBI file described him as a ruthless crime boss, responsible for money laundering, extortion, illegal gambling, narcotics trafficking, and suspected involvement in at least 12 unsolved homicides over the past decade. "No, officer," Rosa lied with surprising smoothness, even shocking herself with how naturally the deception came. "I've never seen this person before in my entire life. Is he dangerous? Should I be worried about my safety?" "Extremely dangerous," Agent Collins replied grimly, scanning Rosa's living room with trained eyes. "Armed and considered shoot on sight by federal marshals. If you see him, under absolutely no circumstances should you approach or attempt to help him. Call us immediately and lock your doors." After the agents finally left, conducting a thorough search of her tiny backyard and questioning her elderly neighbors, Rosa climbed the stairs slowly, her legs trembling like leaves in a hurricane. When she opened the closet door with shaking hands, Arthur was sitting on the floor with his head in his hands, looking more vulnerable than any man she'd ever seen. "They're gone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Arthur looked up, and in the dim light filtering through her bedroom curtains, Rosa could see pain in his dark eyes, not just physical pain from his injuries, but something much deeper, much more profound, soul-deep anguish that spoke of a lifetime of regrets. "You lied for me," he said quietly, his voice filled with wonder and confusion. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Rosa sat carefully on her bed, suddenly feeling exhausted in every bone of her body. "I don't know. Maybe because in 3 years you've always been polite to me. Maybe because you said please instead of demanding. Maybe because you looked scared and I've never seen a scared man before. You know who I am now. Arthur Donovan. Mafia boss. Public enemy #1, Rosa recited carefully, then looked directly into his eyes. But you're also the man who always says thank you when I empty your trash cans, and who left me that $500 Christmas bonus last year with a handwritten note saying you hoped my mother's surgery went well and that I should take the week off with pay. Arthur was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. In his world, kindness was perceived as weakness and compassion was a luxury that could get you killed. But this woman had just risked her freedom, possibly her life, for him based on nothing more than a few polite interactions and one moment of human kindness. How long do you need to stay here? Rosa asked practically. I honestly don't know, Arthur admitted, running his hands through his thick dark hair. Maybe a few days until my people can arrange safe passage out of the country. There are boats leaving from the harbor, private planes at smaller airports. Rosa nodded slowly, thinking through the implications. Then you'll need medical attention for those wounds, and food, and probably clothes that don't scream wanted criminal to everyone who sees you. The next morning, Arthur woke up on Rosa's small couch, completely disoriented and confused about his surroundings. Warm sunlight streamed through inexpensive curtains that somehow made the whole room feel cozy and welcoming, and he could smell strong coffee brewing in the kitchen, along with something that smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, maybe pancakes or French toast. For just a moment, he forgot where he was and why he was there, until he tried to move, and his cracked ribs screamed in absolute agony, reminding him of the previous night's desperate escape. "Good, you're finally awake," Rosa said warmly, emerging from the kitchen carrying a steaming mug with a cheerful yellow smiley face on it. She'd changed from her pajamas into well-worn jeans and a simple cream-colored sweater that brought out the golden highlights in her brown eyes. Her long black hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she looked fresh and beautiful despite the early hour. "I called in sick to both my jobs today, told them I had the flu and might be contagious." Arthur struggled to sit up, his entire body feeling like he'd been hit by a freight train, and accepted the coffee gratefully. It was strong and black, exactly how he liked it, though he didn't remember telling her his preference. "You didn't have to do that. I don't want you losing income because of my problems." "Yes, I absolutely did have to," Rosa replied firmly, settling herself across from him in her father's old brown leather armchair, which was worn but comfortable and clearly loved. "Because as of last night, I officially became an accessory to whatever crimes you've committed. So before this goes any further, and I dig myself in even deeper, I need to know the absolute truth about everything. What exactly are you running from?" Arthur studied her face carefully, searching for signs of fear or moral judgment, but found only determination mixed with genuine concern. She deserved honesty, especially after risking so much for him. 3 months ago, someone in my inner circle started feeding detailed information to the FBI. Yesterday evening, they conducted simultaneous raids on everything: my offices, my private clubs, my homes, my warehouses, even my mother's gravesite. They knew exactly where to look, exactly when we'd be vulnerable. Someone gave them everything. "So you have an informant," Rosa said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "A rat, as they say in the movies. A rat who's about to become very, very rich," Arthur confirmed grimly, his voice filled with betrayal and rage. "The FBI offered someone in my most trusted inner circle witness protection, a new identity, and probably several $1 million in exchange for enough evidence to put me away from multiple consecutive life sentences. And you have absolutely no idea who it could be." Arthur's laugh was bitter and filled with years of accumulated cynicism. "That's the beautiful part of this whole situation. It could literally be anyone. My personal lawyer who knows all my financial secrets, my accountant who handles the money laundering, my oldest childhood friend who runs the drug operations, even my own cousin who I've treated like a brother since we were kids. In my business, loyalty is just another commodity to be bought and sold to the highest bidder." Rosa sipped her coffee thoughtfully, processing all this information while watching his face. "What happens if they actually catch you?" "Life in federal prison without possibility of parole. Multiple life sentences running consecutively," Arthur said flatly. "If I'm extremely lucky and manage to avoid the death penalty." He met her eyes directly. "And what happens to you for helping me is something I'm desperately trying not to think about, because it keeps me awake at night. They'll arrest me for harboring a fugitive, obstruction of justice, aiding and abetting." "Rosa," Arthur said urgently, leaning forward despite the pain in his ribs, "I can leave right now. I never should have come here in the first place. This was selfish and unfair to you." "No," she interrupted with surprising firmness, holding up her hand. "I made my choice last night with full knowledge of the risks, but if we're going to do this, I need to establish some ground rules that we both agree to follow." Arthur raised an eyebrow in amazement. Even his most trusted lieutenants, men who'd killed for him without question, didn't give Arthur Donovan ground rules about anything. "First rule," Rosa began, counting on her fingers, "absolutely no phone calls from this house to anyone in your organization. They can trace those calls back here within minutes. Second, no weapons of any kind in my house, no guns, no knives, nothing that could hurt innocent people. And third," she paused, gathering her courage, "you tell me the complete truth about everything from now on. No more lies, no more manipulation, no more games or half-truths. And what do I get in return for following your rules? I help you disappear completely," Rosa said simply, her voice steady and determined. "I'll hide you, feed you, take care of your injuries, and do whatever I can to keep you safe. But when this is all over, You disappear from my life too, forever. We both go back to our separate worlds and pretend this never happened." Arthur felt an unexpected, sharp pang of loss at her words, though he couldn't understand why. Deal. What neither of them realized in that moment was that Agent Sarah Collins was parked across the street in an unmarked surveillance van, watching Rosa's house through high-powered military binoculars and listening to their conversation through sophisticated electronic equipment, waiting patiently for any sign that their primary suspect was closer than they had ever imagined. By the third day of this strange arrangement, an unusual but comfortable rhythm had developed within the walls of Rosa's small house. Arthur, surprisingly, had insisted on helping with cooking and household tasks, revealing culinary skills that absolutely amazed Rosa. These were remnants from his childhood, when his beloved mother had taught him to prepare traditional Italian dishes before the brutal realities of the family business consumed their lives completely. "You're completely different than I expected," Rosa admitted honestly, watching him expertly flip a perfect omelette filled with fresh herbs and cheese. His movements in the kitchen were confident and precise, like a man who genuinely enjoyed creating something beautiful and nourishing. "Disappointed by the reality?" Arthur asked with a slight smile, carefully plating their breakfast on her mismatched dishes with the care of a professional chef. "Confused, actually," she replied with complete honesty. "The news reports make you sound like some kind of monster, but you've been nothing but polite and helpful. You even make your bed every morning and wash your dishes immediately after eating." Arthur set her plate down gently, the omelette still steaming and garnished with fresh chives from her little herb garden. "My mother raised me properly before she died in what the police called a car accident when I was 16 years old. After her funeral, my Uncle Tony took over my education in very different subjects." "Tony Donovan," Rosa said quietly, recognizing the name. "I remember reading about his death in the newspapers 5 years ago. Very violent end." "Uncle Tony taught me that respect and fear were essentially the same emotion," Arthur continued, sitting across from her at the small kitchen table. "That showing weakness or mercy would get you killed in our world, and that compassion was a luxury we simply couldn't afford if we wanted to survive. Do you actually believe that philosophy?" Arthur was quiet for a long moment, studying Rosa's face as she ate. "I used to believe it completely, without question. But you've shown me genuine mercy when you had every reason to turn me over to the authorities. And you're stronger and braver than most of my armed soldiers." Their intimate conversation was interrupted by Rosa's phone ringing loudly. Arthur immediately tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward where his weapon would normally be. But he relaxed when Rosa answered with her usual warmth and affection. "Hi, Mama. Yes, I'm feeling much better today. No, you absolutely don't need to come over and take care of me. I have plenty of soup and medicine. I love you too, Mama." After hanging up, Rosa found Arthur staring pensively out the kitchen window at her small backyard, where clothes hung on a simple clothesline, and tomatoes grew in neat rows. "That was my mother," she explained unnecessarily. "She worries about me constantly, especially since my father died. My mother used to call me every single day when I was in high school," Arthur said softly, his voice filled with longing. "She'd ask about my classes, my friends, whether I was eating enough vegetables, if I needed money for school supplies, normal mother things that seemed annoying then but feel precious now. What happened to that normal life you had planned?" Arthur turned from the window to face her directly. "Tony happened. After my mother's funeral, he moved me into his mansion in the suburbs, gave me everything money could buy: cars, clothes, private tutors, anything I wanted, and slowly, methodically turned me into what the family business needed. A successor who could be even more ruthless and calculating than he had ever been." "But you're not ruthless," Rosa observed thoughtfully. "At least, not with me." "No," Arthur agreed, something fundamental shifting in his expression as he looked at her. "Definitely not with you." That afternoon, while Rosa was taking a long, hot shower, Arthur's encrypted burner phone buzzed with a text message from his right-hand man, Vincent. "Heat's finally cooling down around the city. Can extract you tomorrow night if you're ready. Stay completely hidden until then." Relief flooded through Arthur's entire body, but it was unexpectedly tinged with something he couldn't identify at first: disappointment, maybe even sadness. Tomorrow night, he'd be on a private jet to a non-extradition country somewhere in South America, and this strange, peaceful interlude with Rosa would be over forever. But as he heard her humming softly in the shower, some Spanish love song her mother used to sing, Arthur realized with shocking clarity that he didn't want any of this to end. That evening, a massive thunderstorm knocked out the electrical power throughout the entire neighborhood, plunging Rosa's house into complete darkness. Arthur found Rosa in the kitchen, lighting an array of colorful candles with the practiced efficiency of someone who dealt with frequent power outages. "Very romantic atmosphere," he teased gently, trying to lighten the increasingly heavy mood between them. "Purely practical," Rosa corrected, but she was smiling in a way that made her eyes sparkle in the candlelight. "The power goes out here at least once or twice every month during storm season. I learned to be prepared for anything." They ate dinner by the warm, flickering candlelight while the storm raged violently outside, creating an unexpectedly intimate atmosphere that felt both comforting and dangerous. Arthur told her stories about his childhood dreams of becoming a professional chef, perhaps opening his own restaurant someday, while Rosa shared memories of her late father and her own dreams of eventually opening a small family restaurant where people could feel loved and welcome. "Why did you choose cleaning as your profession?" Arthur asked curiously. "You're obviously intelligent enough and capable enough to do absolutely anything you set your mind to." Rosa shrugged, twirling pasta around her fork. "My father got sick with pancreatic cancer when I was 20 years old, and in my junior year of college studying business management. I dropped out immediately to take care of him full-time and work multiple jobs to help pay for his medical treatments and keep us from losing the house. After he died 3 years later, I just stayed in the same routine. It felt safer somehow. You sacrificed your entire future for him." "I did what families do when they love each other," Rosa replied simply, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "We take care of each other, no matter what the personal cost might be." Arthur felt a sharp stab of something completely foreign to him, profound regret mixed with envy. In his world, family meant business relationships and business meant exploitation and manipulation. But Rosa spoke of love and sacrifice as if they were beautiful, natural things that brought joy instead of pain. "I've never experienced anything like that," he admitted quietly, his voice barely audible above the thunder. "What do you mean?" "Family love?" "Real love of any kind," Arthur said, the words feeling strange and vulnerable on his tongue. "Genuine, unconditional love without strings attached. Everything in my world comes with expectations, obligations, debts that must eventually be repaid." Rosa reached across the small table and touched his hand gently. Her skin was soft and warm, and the simple contact sent electricity through Arthur's entire nervous system. "I'm sorry. That must be incredibly lonely." The simple touch and genuine compassion in her voice affected Arthur more powerfully than anything he'd ever experienced. When was the last time someone had touched him without wanting something in return? When had anyone looked at him with real compassion instead of fear? Calculation or desperate need? "Rosa," he said, his voice rougher and more emotional than he intended. She didn't pull her hand away from his. "Yes? When this is all over, when I'm gone and you're back to your normal life, will you ever think about me, even occasionally?" Her dark eyes searched his face intensely in the golden candlelight. "Arthur, I'm already thinking about you far too much for my own good." The honest confession hung in the air between them, loaded with equal measures of possibility and impossibility. Arthur stood slowly, moving around the small table to where she sat, drawn by forces he didn't fully understand. "This is dangerous for both of us," he whispered, but his hand was already reaching for her face. "Everything about you is dangerous," Rosa replied softly, but she leaned into his touch like a flower turning toward sunlight. When Arthur finally kissed her, it was soft and desperate and nothing like the calculated, emotionless encounters of his past. Rosa tasted like hope and home, and all the beautiful things he'd thought were lost forever. Outside, the storm raged on with increasing fury, but inside Rosa's small house, something beautiful and terrifying and absolutely life-changing was beginning to bloom. Arthur woke before dawn, with Rosa's head resting peacefully on his chest, her breathing soft and even in the grey morning light. Sometime during the long night, they'd moved to her bed, not for physical passion but for emotional comfort and connection. She'd held him close while he talked about his mother, about the innocent boy he used to be before Tony's violent world swallowed him whole and changed him into something unrecognizable. Now, watching her sleep in the gentle early light filtering through her simple white curtains, Arthur felt something he'd never experienced in his entire adult life, the powerful desire to be worthy of someone else's love and respect. His encrypted phone vibrated with another urgent message from Vincent. "Plans have changed completely. FBI got Marco last night during raid. Need to move you tonight instead of tomorrow. Situation getting critical. Marco. Arthur closed his eyes tightly, sharp pain shooting through his heart like a knife. Marco Santelli had been with him for 15 years, more like a brother than an employee, and his loyalty had been absolute and unquestioning. If the FBI had Marco in custody, they'd gotten much closer to the core of his organization than Arthur had realized. Rosa stirred gently against his chest, somehow sensing his distress even in sleep. "What's wrong?" she whispered, her voice still thick with dreams. "They caught one of my closest men last night," Arthur said quietly, trying not to wake her completely. "Marco Santelli. He's been with me since he was 19 years old. He's got a wife named Maria and 2 small children, a boy and a girl." Rosa sat up immediately, reading the genuine anguish in Arthur's face. "What will happen to him now?" 25 years to life in federal prison if he's extremely lucky and cooperative," Arthur said, his jaw tightening with rage and helplessness. "Unless—" He paused, the implications hitting him fully. "Unless what?" "Unless he makes a deal with the prosecutors," Arthur continued, his voice thoughtful rather than angry. "Unless he agrees to testify against me in exchange for a reduced sentence and protection for his family. Do you think he'll betray you?" Arthur thought carefully about Marco's unwavering loyalty over the years, about the wallet photos of his children that Marco showed everyone proudly, about the family barbecues where Arthur had watched Marco teach his son to throw a baseball. "I genuinely hope he does betray me. His children need their father more than I need his silence and loyalty." Rosa stared at him in amazement. "You actually mean that?" "Yes, I do. But the news reports say you're ruthless and merciless, that you'd kill anyone who crossed you without hesitation." Arthur met her eyes directly. "The news reports are absolutely accurate. I have killed people who betrayed me for money or power or personal gain. But Marco wouldn't be betraying me for selfish reasons. He'd be choosing his children's future over my freedom. I can't hate any man for making that choice." Rosa kissed his forehead softly, and Arthur felt something crack open in his chest. "You're not the monster they say you are." "I am exactly that monster," Arthur said seriously, wanting her to understand the complete truth. "I've done terrible things to innocent people, Rosa, but maybe I don't have to continue being that person for the rest of my life." That afternoon, Arthur made a decision that would change everything about his future. Using Rosa's laptop computer, he began systematically transferring money from his numerous hidden offshore accounts, millions upon millions of dollars, going to victims' families, children's charities, organizations that helped people he'd hurt over the years through his business activities. Rosa watched over his shoulder, amazed by the sheer amounts involved. "What exactly are you doing?" "Trying to buy back a small piece of my soul," Arthur replied, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "It's not nearly enough. It'll never be enough to truly make amends, but it's a start towards something better." As he worked, Arthur told Rosa everything about his business operations, the protection rackets that terrorized small business owners, the money laundering through legitimate businesses, the drug trafficking that destroyed entire communities, the violence that left families shattered. He spared her absolutely nothing, wanting her to understand exactly who she'd been harboring in her home. "Why are you telling me all of this?" Rosa asked, when he finished the brutal confession. Arthur turned to face her completely. "Because I'm falling in love with you, and I need you to know exactly what that means. I need you to understand that loving me could completely destroy your life, and you deserve to make that choice with full knowledge." Rosa was quiet for a long, tense moment, processing everything he'd revealed. Finally, she spoke with quiet conviction. "Arthur, I've been falling in love with you too, and yes, it terrifies me more than anything I've ever faced." "Then run," Arthur whispered desperately. "Leave tonight. Go stay with your mother until this entire situation is resolved. Don't let my problems destroy everything good in your life." "No," Rosa said firmly, her voice stronger than steel. "I'm not running from this. I'm not running from us." Outside, Agent Collins lowered her high-powered binoculars and spoke quietly into her radio. "Target confirmed at location. Rosa Martinez is definitely harboring Arthur Donovan. Request full tactical team for coordinated raid tomorrow at dawn." Their last night together was bittersweet and filled with the knowledge that everything was about to change forever. Vincent had confirmed the emergency extraction plan. Through encrypted messages, a small fishing boat would pick Arthur up at the Charlestown Marina at exactly midnight, then transport him to a private jet at a small airport outside the city, from which he would disappear to the Cayman Islands where he could vanish completely. "Come with me," Arthur said suddenly as they sat together on her small back porch, sharing a bottle of red wine under the brilliant stars. The words surprised him as much as they did her. Rosa's heart stopped completely. "What did you just say?" "Come with me," he repeated, turning to face her with desperate intensity. "I know it sounds completely insane. I know I'm asking you to give up absolutely everything you've ever known. But Rosa, I honestly cannot imagine spending the rest of my life without you anymore." "Arthur," she started, but he interrupted with passionate urgency. "I'm not the same man who broke into your house 5 days ago," he said, taking her hands in his. "You've changed something fundamental inside me, made me remember who I used to be before the violence and corruption, who I could still become with the right person beside me. I love you completely, and I want to spend whatever years I have left trying to make you happy." Rosa felt tears burning her eyes as she processed what he was offering. And what kind of life would that really be for us? Always looking over our shoulders? Always running from place to place? Never able to settle down or build something real? "Free," Arthur said simply, his voice filled with wonder at the concept. "For the first time in 20 years, I would be completely free from all of this." Rosa stood and walked to the porch railing, Arthur following close behind her. In the distance, she could see the lights of downtown Boston, where she'd built her small but honest life. "I can't do it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My mother, my friends, my entire life is here. I can't just disappear like I never existed." "Then I'll stay here with you," Arthur said desperately, his voice cracking with emotion. "We'll figure out some other solution. Maybe I can make a deal with the FBI, testify against my organization, and spend the rest of your life in federal prison. If it means being close enough to see you occasionally, then yes, absolutely." Rosa turned and cupped his face gently in her hands. "You beautiful, wonderful, stupid man. Don't you understand anything? I love you far too much to let you throw your entire life away for me." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and heartbreak and desperate longing into that single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both were crying openly. "Then this is goodbye forever," Arthur whispered, his voice barely audible. "No," Rosa said with fierce determination. "This is see you later. Somehow, someday, some way, we'll find each other again. I absolutely have to believe that, or I won't be able to let you go." At exactly 11:30 p.m., Arthur gathered his few belongings into a small duffel bag. Rosa had given him her father's old jacket and favorite baseball cap, simple clothes that would help him blend in with dock workers and fishermen at the marina. "Rosa, there's something critical I need to tell you before I go," Arthur said at the front door, his hand on the doorknob. "What is it? Whatever happens after tonight, no matter what you hear about me on the news or read in the papers, I want you to know that these 5 days with you were the happiest and most meaningful of my entire life." Rosa nodded, unable to speak around the massive lump in her throat, threatening to choke her. Arthur kissed her one final time, soft and lingering, then disappeared into the darkness toward the marina and whatever uncertain future awaited him. What neither of them knew was that Agent Collins and her full tactical team were already in position around the marina, waiting in the shadows to arrest Arthur the very moment he appeared at the extraction point. Therefore, Arthur made it exactly 3 blocks from Rosa's house before his survival instincts, honed by 20 years of constant paranoia, told him he was being followed. The black SUVs were subtle and professional, maintaining proper distances, but after decades of evading law enforcement, he'd developed an almost supernatural sixth sense for surveillance. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Turn around immediately. Go back to Rosa right now, trust me on this. You're walking into a trap. A friend who cares." Arthur's blood turned to ice water in his veins. Whoever was texting him knew about Rosa, which meant her safety was now compromised regardless of what he did. Without hesitation, he turned around immediately, running through backyards and narrow alleys toward her house, his heart pounding with terror for her safety. He arrived just in time to see Agent Collins and her tactical team surrounding Rosa's home from all sides, preparing for what looked like a military-style raid. Black-clad agents with automatic weapons were positioning themselves at every possible exit. "Damn it all to hell," Arthur breathed, pulling out his phone to call Rosa's number. It went straight to voicemail, which meant either her phone was turned off or something had already happened to her. Inside the house, Rosa had heard the telltale click of her front door lock being expertly picked. She'd been half expecting this moment, had seen the way Arthur tensed whenever a car passed too slowly by her house, had noticed the increasing FBI presence in her neighborhood over the past few days. Moving with surprising efficiency, she grabbed the emergency bag she'd secretly packed and slipped quietly out her back door just as the FBI tactical team burst through the front with tremendous force. "Clear the first floor," Agent Collins shouted, frustrated to find the house empty, except for obvious evidence that Arthur had been living there. Rosa made it to her neighbor's backyard before she heard Arthur's familiar voice calling softly from the darkness. "Rosa, over here, quickly." She found him crouched behind Mrs. Patterson's garden shed, his face grim with determination and barely controlled rage. "They were waiting for me at the marina. This whole extraction was an elaborate setup from the beginning. Who sent you the warning text? I have no idea, but someone definitely wanted me to come back here instead of walking into their trap." Arthur's mind was racing, putting pieces together. The question is why they'd want that. Their answer came in the form of Vincent's voice emerging from the shadows. "Because I needed to tell you something crucial, boss. Something about who really sold us out to the federal government." Arthur tensed immediately, his hand moving instinctively to where his weapon should be, every muscle in his body coiled for violence. "Vincent, I thought you were arranging the emergency extraction." "I was, until I discovered that the FBI already knew every single detail about it." Vincent stepped into the pale moonlight, his face haggard and filled with exhaustion. "Arthur, it wasn't Marco who betrayed our organization." "Then who the hell was it?" "Agent Collins herself," Vincent said grimly. "She's been feeding classified information to Tony's old enemies for months, using the FBI investigation to settle personal scores and old family vendettas. She wanted you captured alive, but not before she could arrange for certain people to disappear permanently." Rosa grabbed Arthur's arm tightly. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Arthur said, his voice deadly quiet with understanding, "that Agent Collins isn't trying to arrest me for justice. She's trying to kill me for revenge." As if summoned by his words, Collins appeared from around the corner of the house, service weapon drawn and pointed directly at Arthur's chest. "Well, well, well," she said with cold satisfaction. "Arthur Donovan, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and multiple counts of murder." But Arthur noticed immediately that her tactical team wasn't with her, and her finger was already positioned on the trigger in a way that suggested she had no intention of taking him alive. "Agent Sarah Collins," Arthur said with deadly calm, stepping protectively in front of Rosa, despite the gun pointed at his heart. "That's a very interesting thing. I just learned something absolutely fascinating about your real identity." Collins' weapon didn't waver even slightly. "I seriously doubt that, you murdering piece of garbage. Your maiden name was DeMarco." "Wasn't it?" Arthur continued, pieces of a 15-year-old puzzle clicking into place in his mind. "As in Tommy DeMarco, the honest businessman my Uncle Tony killed 15 years ago when he wouldn't sell his shipping company." For the first time since Arthur had known her, Collins' professional mask slipped completely, revealing raw hatred and years of accumulated rage. "Tony Donovan destroyed my entire family for profit. My father was a good, honest businessman until your psychotic uncle decided he wanted Dad's shipping company for smuggling operations." So this was never about justice or law enforcement, Arthur realized with crystal clarity. This has always been about personal revenge and family honor. Tony's dead and buried, but his legacy of violence and corruption lives on in you, Collins spat venomously. The DeMarco family demands satisfaction, and blood calls for blood. Rosa stepped forward courageously despite Arthur's desperate attempt to shield her from danger. "And you're willing to murder innocent people to get your revenge? What does that make you? Innocent?" Collins laughed bitterly, the sound echoing off the surrounding houses. "He's a monster who's destroyed countless innocent lives and families." "Yes, he absolutely is," Rosa agreed, surprising everyone, including Arthur. "Arthur has done terrible, unforgivable things throughout his life, but he's also capable of genuine love, real change, and meaningful redemption, something you'll apparently never understand or accept." Collins' gun swung toward Rosa with lightning speed. "You naive little... Don't you dare!" Arthur's voice was deadly quiet, but filled with more menace than Collins had ever heard from any criminal. "Don't you point that weapon at her for one more second." In that crystalline moment, Arthur felt the familiar cold rage of his old life rising within him like a tide. But instead of the calculating, business-oriented violence of his past, This was something pure and protective and absolutely primal. Someone was threatening the woman he loved, and he would die before allowing that to happen. "Sarah Collins!" Agent Morrison's authoritative voice cut through the tension like a knife as he appeared with two other federal agents, weapons drawn. "What the hell do you think you're doing out here?" Collins spun around frantically, her gun still raised and ready to fire. "Morrison? How did you find us? How did you even know where Vincent called us 20 minutes ago?" Morrison explained grimly, his own weapon now trained on his partner. "He told us everything about your connection to the DiMarco family, about how you've been feeding classified information to organized crime families for months. They deserve to know the truth about... You've compromised an entire federal investigation," Morrison snapped furiously. "How many innocent people have died because of your personal vendetta and thirst for revenge?" As the federal agents argued among themselves, Arthur grabbed Rosa's hand firmly and began backing slowly away into the protective darkness. But Collins noticed their movement and swung her gun back toward them with desperate fury. "Nobody leaves here alive," she screamed, her finger tightening on the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the quiet neighborhood like thunder, but it wasn't Collins who had fired. Vincent stood 20 feet away, service weapon in his hand, his face grim with resolution. "Sorry, boss, but I couldn't let her murder you and Rosa in cold blood." Collins collapsed to the ground, clutching her shoulder and screaming in rage, pain, and frustration. "Vincent," Arthur said quietly, his voice filled with complex emotions. "I know, boss. I know this doesn't change anything between us, and I know you'll probably never forgive me," Vincent replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "But Rosa's absolutely right. You're different now. Maybe it's finally time for all of us to be different too." As Morrison called frantically for medical assistance and backup, Arthur realized this might be their only chance to escape. "Come on," he whispered urgently to Rosa, pulling her toward the darkness of the woods behind her house. "We have maybe 10 minutes before this entire area is completely crawling with federal agents and local police." They ran desperately through the thick woods behind Rosa's neighborhood for 20 exhausting minutes before Arthur's injured ribs and various other wounds forced them to stop and rest. Rosa found a small clearing surrounded by tall pine trees where they could catch their breath and try to think clearly about their next moves. "Arthur," she panted heavily, "what exactly just happened back there? Who was Vincent really talking to when he called the FBI?" Arthur sat heavily against a large tree trunk, wincing in pain as his injuries reminded him of their severity. "I'm honestly not sure, but Vincent just saved both our lives, and that doesn't make any logical sense unless..." He paused, pieces of an incredibly complex puzzle clicking into place in his analytical mind. "Unless what?" "Unless Vincent has been working undercover with the FBI from the very beginning of this entire operation," Arthur said slowly, his voice thoughtful rather than angry. "Think about it logically. He always knew exactly where I was and when. He had complete access to all my communications and business operations. He could arrange my movements and schedules with perfect precision." Rosa felt cold dread despite the warm night air. "So he's the informant who's been feeding information to the government? But not for money or immunity deals," Arthur continued, his voice filled with understanding rather than betrayal. "Vincent lost his younger brother Danny in a gang shooting 3 years ago. A 14-year-old honor student caught in crossfire from one of our territorial disputes with a rival family. So he wanted to bring down your entire organization." Arthur shook his head firmly. "No, that's not Vincent's motivation at all. He wants to bring down the entire corrupt system, the violence, the drugs, the cycle of revenge that keeps destroying innocent families like his own." Rosa's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Arthur, this is Agent Morrison. Collins is in federal custody and will face serious charges. We need to talk immediately. Meet us at Rosa's house in 1 hour. Come alone if possible, and we might be able to work something beneficial out for everyone." Arthur read the message over Rosa's shoulder, his mind racing with possibilities. "It's probably a trap." "Maybe it is," Rosa said quietly, "considering their extremely limited options. Or maybe it's the only real chance we'll ever have to end this nightmare. Rosa, I absolutely will not let you..." "This isn't just about you anymore," she interrupted with fierce determination. "Collins would have killed me tonight without any hesitation whatsoever. I'm part of this situation now whether we like it or not, and I refuse to spend the rest of my life running and hiding." Arthur studied her face in the pale moonlight filtering through the pine trees. 4 days ago, she'd been a simple cleaning lady living a quiet, peaceful life in East Boston. Now she was harboring a federal fugitive and being hunted by corrupt government agents who wanted them both dead. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly, his voice filled with genuine anguish. "I'm sorry I brought all this chaos and violence and danger into your beautiful life." Rosa took both his hands in hers, looking directly into his eyes. "Arthur, I want you to listen to me very carefully." He met her steady gaze. "I don't regret a single moment of what's happened between us. Not the fear, not the danger, not even tonight's violence. Because these 5 days have shown me what it really feels like to be truly alive, to love someone completely and unconditionally." She paused, gathering her courage. "But I need to ask you something critical. Anything at all. If Agent Morrison is legitimate, if he can offer you some kind of reasonable plea deal or cooperation agreement, would you seriously consider taking it?" Arthur was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. "You mean testify against my own organization? Send people I've worked with for years to federal prison?" "I mean choose a completely different life," Rosa said with quiet intensity. "Choose me. Choose us. Choose the possibility of something real and honest and beautiful. Rosa, even if I cooperate fully with the federal government, I'll still face serious criminal charges. I'll probably go to prison for years." "How many years, realistically?" Arthur considered all the variables carefully. "If I give them absolutely everything and testify against everyone, maybe 5 to 7 years with good behavior and cooperation credit." "I can wait 5 years," Rosa said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "The real question is, can you live with the consequences of bringing down your own criminal world?" Arthur thought about Vincent's dead brother, Danny, about Marco's children who needed their father, about all the innocent families torn apart by the violence and corruption he'd participated in for 20 years. "Yes," he said finally, his voice steady and certain. "I can live with those consequences. The question that terrifies me is, can I live the rest of my life without you?" Rest. Exactly 1 hour later, Arthur and Rosa approached her house with extreme caution, every shadow potentially hiding federal agents or enemies. The FBI had established a secure perimeter around the entire block, but Agent Morrison stood alone on the front porch exactly as he'd promised, his hands clearly visible and empty. "Mr. Donovan," Morrison said formally as they approached through Rosa's front yard. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for trusting us enough to come back." "Agent Morrison," Arthur replied carefully, "I assume Vincent has filled you in completely on my current situation and legal exposure." "He has indeed. And I have a very specific proposition for you that I think you'll find interesting." Morrison gestured for them to sit on the porch steps, like old friends having a conversation. "Full cooperation and testimony in exchange for a structured plea agreement. Conspiracy charges only, maximum 7 years in federal prison." "And what exactly would full cooperation entail in practical terms?" "Everything we need to dismantle your organization completely," Morrison said bluntly. "Financial records going back 20 years, supplier and distributor networks, corrupt officials on your payroll, the complete organizational structure of the Donovan crime family." Arthur was quiet for several minutes, thinking through all the implications. "And what happens to Rosa throughout all of this? Complete immunity from all charges. She was clearly acting under extreme duress and had no knowledge of your criminal activities." Rosa started to protest that characterization, but Arthur squeezed her hand gently. "What about protective custody during my incarceration? If I testify against these people, they'll want us both dead within hours." "New identities and complete relocation after your prison sentence," Morrison confirmed. "Both of you, if that's what you choose when the time comes." "And Vincent? What's his situation?" Morrison smiled grimly. "Vincent has been working undercover with our organized crime task force for over 2 years. He'll receive full protection and probably a commendation." Arthur turned to Rosa, studying her face in the porch light. 7 years is a very long time to wait for someone. "But it's not forever," she replied with quiet conviction. "And at the end of those 7 years, we get to start completely over with clean slates. Really start over with no secrets between us. There's something else you should know," Morrison added. "The information Vincent provided led us to uncover a massive corruption network throughout New England. Federal judges, prosecutors, police commissioners, city officials, all taking substantial payments from organized crime families. Your testimony could help us clean up an entire regional system." Arthur thought about the innocent boy he used to be before Tony's violent world consumed him, the one who had dreamed of becoming a chef and making people happy instead of afraid. "If I agree to do this," he said slowly, working through the details, "I want ironclad guarantees about Rosa's safety during my entire incarceration period." "Absolutely done. And I want to establish a substantial compensation fund for victims' families using my remaining assets and offshore accounts." Morrison nodded approvingly. "That can definitely be arranged through the court system." Arthur stood and walked to the porch railing, where he could see the lights of downtown Boston, the city where he'd built his criminal empire through violence, fear, and corruption. Rosa followed him, sensing the magnitude of the decision he was about to make. "You know something interesting," he said quietly, his voice filled with wonder. "My mother always told me that good things come to men who have the courage to choose love over power, family over business." "What are you saying?" Rosa asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. Arthur turned to face Agent Morrison with absolute resolve. "I'll take your deal and cooperate fully, but I have one non-negotiable condition." "What's that?" Arthur pulled Rosa close, her small hand fitting perfectly in his much larger one. "I want to marry Rosa before I go to federal prison. I want her to know that even in the worst possible circumstances, even facing years of separation, I choose her. I choose love over everything else." Rosa's eyes filled with tears of joy and amazement. "Arthur, marry me, Rosa Martinez," he said, dropping to one knee right there on her front porch where this entire adventure had begun. "Marry me, and when I get out of prison in 5 or 7 years, we'll open that little restaurant you always dreamed of. We'll build something beautiful and honest together." "Yes," Rosa whispered through her tears, then louder and stronger. "Yes, absolutely yes." As Arthur slipped his mother's simple gold ring onto Rosa's finger, the one precious thing he'd carried with him since she died, Agent Morrison cleared his throat with what might have been the hint of a smile. "Well," he said diplomatically, "I suppose I should mention that exemplary behavior and cooperation could potentially reduce that 7-year sentence to 4 or 5 years. 5 years later, a warm spring evening. Rosa stood in the bustling kitchen of Arthur's Table, the cozy neighborhood restaurant they'd opened 8 months after Arthur's early release from federal prison. The dining room was nothing fancy, maybe 25 tables, an open kitchen design, and walls covered with framed photos of their small wedding ceremony and the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment of peace and happiness. "Order up for table 12, Arthur called out enthusiastically from behind the main prep station, sliding a perfectly plated osso buco across the stainless steel pass. His thick hair was now distinguished with silver at the temples, and years of honest cooking had softened the hard, dangerous edges of his face, but his dark eyes still lit up with pure joy every single time he looked at Rosa. "The family at table 6 wants to personally compliment the chef," Rosa announced with a warm smile, tying her favorite apron around her waist. She'd learned to cook professionally alongside Arthur during their marathon phone conversations throughout his imprisonment, turning their shared recipes and dreams into the reality of this welcoming neighborhood gathering place. "Tell them the chef is currently too busy falling madly in love with his wife all over again," Arthur replied with a grin, stealing a quick but passionate kiss as she passed by his station. Their life now was simple, honest, and filled with the kind of beauty that comes from building something meaningful together. Arthur used the culinary skills his beloved mother had taught him decades ago to create meals that brought families together, instead of tearing them apart through violence. Rosa managed the front of the restaurant with the same natural warmth and quiet efficiency that had once made her invisible to the powerful men in downtown office buildings. The brass bell above the front door chimed cheerfully, and Vincent walked in with his new partner, Detective Sarah Kim. After his undercover work helped clean up police corruption throughout the region, Vincent had joined law enforcement officially, determined to protect innocent families instead of participating in their destruction. "Should I prepare your usual table by the window?" Rosa asked, embracing Vincent with genuine warmth and affection. "Actually, we have some exciting news to share," Vincent said, his face beaming with happiness. Detective Kim held up her left hand proudly, showing off a beautiful engagement ring that sparkled in the restaurant's warm lighting. He finally worked up the courage to ask. The entire restaurant erupted in spontaneous applause and cheers from their regular customers, mostly working families from the surrounding neighborhood, who had become like an extended family to Arthur and Rosa over the months. As the busy evening wound down and the last satisfied customers headed home to their families, Arthur found Rosa on the small balcony behind the kitchen, where they often sat together after service, sharing a glass of wine and talking about their day. "Tired tonight?" he asked softly, wrapping his strong arms around her from behind. "Happy tired," Rosa replied with a contented sigh, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Do you ever miss any of it? The power, the respect, the fear, all that money?" Arthur considered her question seriously, as he always did when she asked about his past life. "I miss the certainty of it sometimes, the sense of control over my environment, but I don't miss the constant fear or the terrible loneliness, or the endless cycle of violence that destroyed so many lives." He turned her gently in his arms to face him. "I used to think respect meant making people afraid of me, intimidating them into submission. Now I understand that real respect is what our customers give us every single night when they trust us to feed their families and create a safe, welcoming place for them." "And love?" Rosa asked, her eyes sparkling with happiness. "Love," Arthur said, kissing her forehead with infinite tenderness, "is coming home to you every single night, building something good and honest together, and knowing that whatever challenges we face in life, we face them as partners." As they stood together on their little balcony overlooking the quiet street, Arthur thought about the lost, angry boy he'd been before Tony's criminal world consumed his innocence, about the dreams his mother had encouraged before tragedy and violence changed everything forever. It had taken 47 years and a federal prison sentence, but he'd finally found his way back to that innocent boy's dreams of making people happy through food and hospitality. And he'd found something even more precious, a woman who loved both the monster he'd been and the good man he was still becoming every day. Inside their restaurant, their wedding photograph sat in a place of honor on the mantel above the stone fireplace. Arthur in a simple grey suit borrowed from Vincent, Rosa radiant in her grandmother's vintage lace dress, both of them glowing with hope and infinite possibility as they exchanged vows in the federal prison chaplain's small office. The inscription below the photo read in Rosa's careful handwriting, "Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin in the darkest places. Love always finds a way." Arthur and Rosa Donovan together forever. Their extraordinary love had survived FBI raids, gunfights, corruption, betrayal, and 5 long years of enforced separation. Now, in their little restaurant filled with the laughter of children and the warmth of honest work, they had discovered they possessed everything they'd ever truly needed: each other and the courage to build something beautiful from the ashes of a broken past.